Hi everyone, welcome back to Cyber Talk with Nikolai show. Today we're going to start discussing very important topic in cybersecurity, zero trust. It's been in the news for quite a few years right now, and we have also very important guest on our show today, Jim Ross. I'm pretty sure you're all very familiar with him, and thank you, Jim, for joining us. So I'll just talk a little bit briefly about you, and then you can add whatever you like that I missed. So Jim has been known in the industry for a very long time, and he's been CISO at JP Morgan, I believe, American Express, Aetna, and Mass Mutual. And I go way back with Jim. I think right now we can celebrate 10 years since we started NHISAC back in the day, and
hmm
established very well and very interesting organization. So it's been great experience working with you, and I certainly appreciate you coming on the show to discuss this very important subject. So I think, how about you just introduce yourself, or if you want to add some interesting facts about yourself that audience may not know, and then we'll dive into zero trust and help everyone to understand what this great concept is all about.
Sounds great. Nikolai, thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to be here and happy to talk about this topic. Interesting topic and pretty broad based. A little bit of background for me. I'm a former CISO 6 times, and currently I'm doing board advisory work. I also teach at NYU. But I'm at the point in my career where I'm working with people I like, doing the kind of work that I like, and only working when I really want to work. So I've got quite a bit of flexibility there, and I'd say one of the biggest liberating forces for me, at least in the last couple of years since I retired, is I don't have to protect an enterprise 24/7. I don't have to think about protecting an enterprise 24/7 because I'm no longer responsible for that, and that's a huge burden that's been lifted and improved my quality of life tremendously. So I have tremendous respect for cybersecurity leaders who deal with that continually. And for me, for 20 years, I just thought that was normal. That was just the way things go. And I've now realized that there's a lot more to life that gives you freedom of not having that burden. So for those of you that are cybersecurity leaders, look forward to the day when you can transition to kind of a different kind of work, and because it is liberating. But in the meantime, let's try to focus on how do we deal with this concept that has permeated all discussion around cybersecurity of zero trust and kind of what that means. And happy to go into that in at least offer my perspective for whatever that's worth.
Definitely. Thank you, Jim, for that. And I think you already alluded into it. What does it actually mean, zero trust? So in May 12th of 2021, Obama signed Executive Order 14028 for improving the nation's cybersecurity, and then a lot of different framework came about. Also, NIST 800 2007 was published. So now all those things created a lot of, as always, motion in the cybersecurity space. So you probably go out there and everyone is trying to sell you zero trust, but I don't think that something someone can purchase, and there's a lot of components and there are a lot of thought goes into it. So why don't we just start from the high level, and what does it mean to you, and how do you see this concept evolving over time, and where cybersecurity professionals or CISO need to look, and how do they eat, sort of speak, this concept?
You said something very interesting. You said zero trust is not something you can purchase. And the irony of your statement is that most of us as cybersecurity professionals learned about the concept of zero trust, the fact that it exists, and kind of what the high level definition is from vendors who sell us products and services. And so when you said it's not something you can buy, I think that's an accurate statement, but it's incongruent with the messaging that many market leading vendors offer, which is we'll give you zero trust. All you have to do is buy our products. So let's start with kind of a basic fundamental construct of zero trust that has resonance, that is meaningful and historically accurate. Um, in cybersecurity enterprise network management, practices going back 3 decades, there was always parts of the network that were trusted. And what trusted meant for enterprises was that those with entitlements, those that had work responsibility, could access that segment and have unfettered access to be able to manage and support that segment of the network. And so we've built, at least at an enterprise basis, we've built a construct that have said that for management and operational and technical support and the managing availability of our critical infrastructure, that there are parts of it that have to be trusted. Uh, where what that essentially what that means is that there's someone who has accountability and responsibility for the management of that infrastructure has access to basically everything, and can manipulate and maneuver and navigate different parts of the network segment as part of that management responsibility. So the notion of zero trust says you don't give anybody access to network segments or areas of your critical infrastructure without some level of assurance. And in fact, the more level of assurance and control you put in place, the more you can essentially establish this notion that no one's trusted. And the rationale behind that is that if it used to be when we first learned about authentication, that authentication was an event that allow you access to be trusted. And if you had the credentials, you were in. And what's happened in really the last decade is that criminals and cyber security threat actors have discovered it's much easier to get into an enterprise with credentials because you're theoretically trusted, but you have unfettered access to more assets that can be exploited. And so, unfortunately, uh, you can have the credentials and be inside a network and not necessarily be trusted or should be trusted because you might be a criminal that's using credentials harvested in the dark web or obtained through credential stuffing. And this is done at scale today and pretty significantly. So that's kind of one dimension of the evolution of this notion of zero trust is to basically redesign technology to limit the areas of trust that's built into the critical infrastructure, and to the point that maybe no one is essentially trusted, but there's a continuous verification and monitoring process in place that is constantly seeking out those that really shouldn't be, that might be malicious actors, and identifying them and ensuring that they can't get access to critical assets. So the zero trust construct is valuable because think of it as a design principle. Uh, can you achieve it by buying a product? And the answer is no. you, you can achieve it by totally redesigning your critical infrastructure. And there are many enterprises going through a fairly significant transformation in a migration to cloud computing that gives you an opportunity, gives the enterprise an opportunity to actually consider concepts of zero trust in different parts of the critical infrastructure and potentially over many years and many, in large enterprises, many millions of dollars of investment in new capabilities and new technical design. It's very much a possibility to at least aspire to a zero trust model, and perhaps that's exactly what we should do. So there are, my guess is more than a dozen different technology capabilities that would, and there could be more than that, that would have to be in place to achieve a zero trust environment. Um, but it's still something that should be aspirational. And you know, a lot of people think that there's so many vendors talking about zero trust as part and parcel of the products and services that they offer, that it's diluted and not all that useful as a construct any longer. But I think to an enterprise cybersecurity professional, I think there's still some meaning and relevance to that. I think we just have to recognize that it's not a one size fits all model with an individual product, um, which is not necessarily what the product providers are necessarily saying, but it is a aspirational, and B, like a design principle to consider, and C, worthwhile to pursue.
Got it. Thank you, Jim, for that. And that's definitely great answer. So I was thinking along the same lines as like how long and what will entail for companies to achieve zero trust, or would it be possible? And something that you touched upon and extremely important, that this implicit trust has been built over decades. So people don't like to have friction, and I think one of the important concept in this particular thing, how to go from trusting everything and everyone to not trusting everyone. So how do you break that trust that's been built and inherently everyone accepts the fact if I come to get through the door, swipe my badge, enter my login name and password, that's what I've been doing for the past 4 years, I should be good. I don't need to verify anything else. So how do you kind of like deal with that concept to tell the CEO or CFO is like, hey, sorry, you may be prompted for extra things that you need to click on, or extra things may pop up on your cell phone or something else, because that's to me, and I think Jim, it goes back to conversation when I remember when we started in HISec and you talk about how to push certain things. And you mentioned like in some cases, if you want things to change, you introduce the friction. But in this case, I'm kind of like leery. If you introduce too much friction, people will essentially push, and the CISOs will not be successful in implementing the zero trust concept. So, from your point of view or experience, how do you see someone who could be successful in breaking this trust into changing to zero trust, and what would help organizations to go, because at the end of the day we need to make it cybersecurity usable. If you create a lot of hoops to jump through, nobody's going to jump through all those hoops. If they forget about you, just go back to login name and password and we'll be happy there. So I
Yeah.
will take care of the rest. So how do you make this going from all trusted to all untrusted, and people understand this concept, because it's not easy.
No, it's not. And you're spot on in terms of the challenges and complexity to it, certainly at the enterprise scale. So I'm going to start with one dimension of it, and it's actually a good dimension to start at, and it's often not included in the discussion around zero trust, and I'm not entirely sure why, but it's a good place to start for the enterprise, and get you kind of hit the nail on the head there, Nikolai, by saying there are a lot of people in an organization, CEOs, senior executives, that they're not interested in friction, right? They're interested in reducing friction in how they do work, because they make critical decisions and they need access to data to make critical decisions. And making critical decisions, has significant implications and ramifications for the enterprise. So therefore, they want ease of use and convenience. This notion of achieving a zero trust model suggests a lot of pain and friction in terms of the security controls necessary to support the zero trust model. And it turns out that there's some very well established origin for why people believe the greater security you have, the more friction that you have. And the reason people believe that is they should believe that because for, I'll say, 60 years, password was invented about 60 years ago for a file sharing system at MIT. And if we take that as its origin, uh, it was always designed based on a definition of authentication that we all learned in IT. When I say we, everyone learned this. So no matter how you learned about technology, you were exposed to this notion that authentication was an event. It had a beginning and an end. You provided the credentials and you were accepted. And if you didn't provide the credentials, you were out. It was binary. So there's an event, a set of credentials, and then a binary outcome. So as we think about authentication as IT professionals, as cybersecurity professionals, as digital scientists, whatever our vocation is, we always think about that as an event. Well, it turns out that if we change that paradigm, which is not necessarily the easiest thing in the world, but if we change that paradigm and think about authentication as a continuous process, uh, there's a way of applying a greater level of security without friction. And that's the promise. And so passwordless options are a great example of that. Now, we've had password managers that camouflage the complex password. We've had single sign-on solutions that camouflage the password experience from the user, and those are all good intermediate kind of steps. But we have the ability today to actually use passwordless solutions, and the only people that don't want to use password solutions are the cyber criminals because they like using credentials and being in an environment to expose assets. But everybody else, they're not interested in the friction that is associated with using passwords. And in fact, passwords not the problem. It's the problem is we have too many digital assets we can't remember passwords for. So we use the same passwords across different assets, and therefore that leads to credential stuffing and harvesting. And basically, the criminals have billions of credentials at their disposal to use at scale across enterprises. And this is a kind of a we know what the end of the movie is going to be. This is problematic. So if we instead move to where we don't use a one-time password plus a account password as the means of authentication. Again, back in that older model of event driven authentication, move to a continuous process of authentication, use attribute information about how we use the technology components. We can continually authenticate an end user as they're using the service through a device that's either their own device or another device, and map their behavior to an established pattern, understand deviation in that pattern, and revoke access if that deviation gets high enough. We can do all of that in milliseconds, and all of it behind the scenes where it's not exposed to the user. The end user wouldn't even know that. And so that kind of capability and technology and evolution of authentication to a continuous model is an essential construct in zero trust, not often discussed in some of the conversations today, but really should be. It's a great place to start for the enterprise. Now, here's the business benefits of tackling that in that way. Number one, you reduce friction to the end user. What does that mean? It means the end user actually uses the service, and if they're a consumer, theoretically, you should be providing service and product at a lower cost, so you get some revenue or net profit gain, or more revenue from more user interaction or more users interacting. All of that by eliminating the friction. So there's a significant business benefit there for one construct. The second is that the account takeover, the reason criminals like passwords, the account takeover problem goes away. So you have no dollars going out the door for the enterprise for an account that's been taken over. Even if you identify it, you got to reset the password and do all that infrastructure support. So that all goes away too. And then the third component is if you deploy this broadly across a user base or the digital consumer space, you can dismantle the password reset infrastructure and thereby having cost benefit, a reduction in operating costs over time as you deploy this. So applying the construct of zero trust to specifically advancing authentication, moving to a continuous model using a passwordless option, that's a tremendous step forward towards a zero trust construct and a good place to start given our challenges today, whether you do it in terms of employees on the work side or you do it on the SIAM side in terms of consumers. Uh, these are steps that have a significant benefit to your end users and actually could reduce operating costs over the long term and are worth the investment to consider and are a movement towards, in terms of a migration towards a zero trust model. Now, you combine that with the cloud usage of enterprises going through a digital transformation of how they're developing software using a cloud first model and a pipeline managed format, achieving CI/CD. All of this is another step forward to applying zero trust constructs in the development process, protecting the supply chain, but also enabling DevOps teams to own accountability and responsibility for the quality of the software that they're building, giving them tools and capabilities to ensure that software is resilient, and then deploying that in an automated way. Again, another dimension of zero trust that's not necessarily part of Main Street. Zero trust today comes from like DLP vendors and edge protection providers, and that's kind of where the mainstream discussion is from a network architecture standpoint, and those are all areas of opportunity to upgrade infrastructure, kind of adopting zero trust concepts or practices. But there's some other very practical ways, and I think we can't talk about zero trust without at least covering authentication.
Okay, thank you, Jim, for coming on for this important conversation. And we just covered part one of Zero Trust Show. And we'll continue on with part two. And for the audience, please stay tuned for part two.